Most people spend their whole lives wondering if their dreams will ever come true. But imagine this. You're 80 years old, standing on a stage for the very first time, about to sing to a crowd of strangers, even though you lost your voice when you were young. Sounds impossible, doesn't it? Her name was Eleanor Davis. A sweet, quiet woman from a small town in Kentucky, Eleanor had always been known for her kindness, her homemade pies, and the gentle way she cared for her garden. But behind that soft smile was a heart that had carried the same dream for nearly 8 decades, a dream that had once seemed so bright and full of promise, until it was stolen from her. As a child, Eleanor had been inseparable from her music. She would hum along with the old RCA radio in her parents' living room, her voice clear and pure, filling every corner of their little house. Her father, a mechanic who worked long hours fixing up old Ford trucks, would always pause when he heard her singing, his eyes shining with quiet pride. "You've got a gift, Ellie," he'd tell her. "One day, the world's gonna hear that beautiful voice." But fate, as it so often does, had other plans. At the tender age of 16, Eleanor fell ill with a serious throat infection. What seemed like a simple sickness quickly turned into something far worse. The infection damaged her vocal cords, leaving her voice weak and fragile. Doctors told her she might never sing again. For weeks, she sat in her bedroom, staring out the window, tears slipping silently down her cheeks as she listened to the radio of songs she loved, voices she admired, realizing her own voice had fallen silent. Decades passed. Eleanor grew up, got married, raised a family. She baked pies for church fundraisers, taught Sunday school, and smiled through it all. But deep down, her dream lay quietly, like a beautiful song trapped inside her heart. Every time she heard someone sing, it stirred something inside her, a mixture of longing and sadness that never fully went away. And then, something incredible happened. At the age of 80, Eleanor found herself standing in front of a microphone for the very first time, a nervous tremor in her hands and tears already brimming in her eyes. The room was packed, the crowd buzzing with excitement. How did a woman who had lost her voice so young find the courage and the strength to sing again after all these years? If you're still here, feel free to subscribe, because Eleanor's story is just beginning. Eleanor Davis was born in 1943, in a little town where life moved slow and every neighbor knew your name. Her childhood was simple, filled with long summer days spent chasing fireflies and winters bundled up by the fireplace while her mother knitted scarves and her father tinkered with old radios. But the heartbeat of Eleanor's world was always music. Her parents weren't wealthy, but they cherished their old RCA radio, a bulky thing with wooden panels and warm amber lights that glowed in the evenings. Eleanor, even as a tiny girl, would press her ear close to it, mesmerized by the rich, velvety voices of singers from faraway cities, voices that carried her to places she could only dream of. She'd hum along, mimicking every note, her young voice as clear and sweet as the morning air. Her father, John Davis, was especially proud. After long days fixing up battered Ford trucks at the town's only mechanic shop, he'd come home dusty and tired, but his face would light up the moment he heard Eleanor singing in the kitchen. "You've got something special there, Ellie," he'd tell her, ruffling her hair. "Don't ever stop using that voice." Sundays were Eleanor's favorite days. After church, her family would gather around the big oak dining table for a meal, and afterward, she'd put on little performances for her grandparents and cousins. Standing on a makeshift stage made of old crates, she'd sing classics like "You Are My Sunshine" and "Amazing Grace," her small hands clenched tightly and her eyes shining with pure joy. The room would fall quiet, everyone hanging on her every note, until the final word faded and the applause filled the air. Her dream was simple but bright. One day, she wanted to sing on a real stage, under bright lights, with a crowd cheering just for her. She'd lie in bed at night, staring up at the cracked ceiling, imagining herself in a beautiful dress, a microphone in hand, her voice soaring out over thousands of people. The thought made her heart flutter with excitement. In school, Eleanor joined the choir and quickly became the standout soloist. Teachers praised her talent, friends admired her, and whispers even started floating around that maybe, just maybe, Eleanor Davis could be the town's first real star. Music wasn't just a hobby for her. It was a lifeline, a language of the soul, something she felt deep in her bones. Little did she know, those golden days of singing freely and dreaming big were not destined to last. Something was waiting just around the corner, something that would change her life, and her voice, forever. Eleanor was 16 when her world began to unravel. It started as nothing more than a sore throat, a scratchy, nagging feeling that she figured would pass with a little rest and her mother's honey tea. She didn't think much of it at first. After all, everyone got sick now and then. But within days, the discomfort grew worse. Her voice, once clear and strong, became hoarse, then raspy, until it barely rose above a whisper. Her mother grew concerned and took her to the town doctor, a kind old man who had patched up half the neighborhood over the years. He examined her with a serious face and prescribed medicine, reassuring them it was probably just a bad infection. "Rest your voice," he said. "You'll be fine." But Eleanor wasn't fine. Weeks passed, then months. Her voice refused to return. Singing became impossible. Even speaking took effort. She'd sit by the window of her bedroom, watching her friends walk by laughing, headed to choir practice or school dances, while she pressed her fingers to her throat, willing her voice to come back. The worst part wasn't the physical pain, it was the emptiness. Music had been her world, her joy, her escape. Now it was like someone had locked her out of her own dreams and thrown away the key. Her father tried to encourage her, always putting on her favorite records, always saying, "It'll come back, Ellie. Just give it time." But his hopeful eyes grew dimmer with each passing month. Her mother, too, did her best to keep Eleanor's spirits high, but behind closed doors, Eleanor would sometimes catch her crying softly, folding laundry or stirring soup at the stove, wiping her eyes quickly when anyone entered the room. Eleanor stopped going to choir. She stopped performing at family gatherings. She avoided the radio because every song was a painful reminder of what she'd lost. Friends tried to include her in other activities, but she pulled away, her once bright spirit dimmed by disappointment and grief. Doctors ran tests, sent her to specialists in bigger towns, but the answer was always the same: permanent damage to her vocal cords. "You're lucky you can still speak at all," one doctor told her, his voice clinical and detached. "Singing professionally is unlikely." That word, unlikely, echoed in her head for years. She carried it with her everywhere she went, a silent companion to her growing list of unspoken dreams. And so, at 16, Eleanor Davis, once the shining star of her school choir, once the little girl who had filled her home with music, packed away her hopes of ever singing again. She buried them deep, where they couldn't hurt her anymore. Or so she thought. Because even the deepest dreams have a way of resurfacing, when you least expect it. Life, as it tends to do, moved forward. Eleanor graduated from high school with quiet dignity. Her once vibrant plans of pursuing music quietly folded away like an old, worn songbook. Instead, she focused on building a simple, steady life. She married Thomas, a kind-hearted man who worked as a carpenter, and together they settled into a small house not far from where Eleanor had grown up. The years passed in a familiar rhythm, raising children, keeping house, and tending to the little garden Eleanor loved so much. She became known in town for her pies, flaky, golden, always made from scratch, and for her warmth, always ready with a kind word or a helping hand. On the surface, her life looked full and happy. But deep inside, there was always something missing. Music never truly left her world. Thomas, aware of her silent ache, bought her a record player as a wedding gift. On quiet evenings, they'd sit together, letting the voices of Patsy Cline and Johnny Cash fill their living room. Sometimes Eleanor would hum along softly, cautiously, but she never let herself sing. Not fully. It hurt too much to be reminded of what she had lost. There were moments, fleeting, almost dreamlike, when she was tempted to try. One Christmas, when the local church choir was short a soloist, the choir director begged Eleanor to join. "You have a gift," he said, eyes pleading. "We all remember your voice." But Eleanor smiled gently and shook her head. "Not anymore," she whispered. That part of me is gone. Even her children, as they grew older, would ask to hear her sing. Little voices tugging at her sleeve, eyes wide with curiosity. Mama, sing us a song? She'd smile, stroke their hair, and change the subject, offering to read a story instead. Inside, though, the longing never left. It lingered in quiet corners of her heart, showing up at unexpected times, while folding laundry and catching a melody on the radio or hearing a neighbor's voice soar during Sunday service. Each time, it tugged at her like a ghost of the past, a reminder of the dreams she had buried but never truly let go. As the years turned into decades, Eleanor told herself it was too late. Her voice was weak, her body older, and the world, well, the world had moved on. She settled into her role as a grandmother, spoiling her grandchildren with cookies and bedtime stories, keeping busy with garden clubs and church events. Life was good, she told herself. Good enough. But deep down, in the quiet moments when no one was watching, she still wondered, what if? She never could have guessed that the answer to that question was waiting just around the corner, ready to change everything she thought she knew about herself. It happened on an ordinary spring afternoon, the kind of day Eleanor had come to cherish, sunlight pouring through her lace curtains, the scent of lilacs drifting in from the garden. She was in the kitchen, kneading dough for her famous apple pie, when her granddaughter Lily burst through the door, breathless and eyes shining with excitement. "Grandma," Lily called out, waving a bright flyer in her hand. "The town's having a talent show next month for all ages. And guess what? There's a special category for seniors." Eleanor smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's lovely, sweetheart. Are you thinking of signing up?" Lily shook her head, stepping closer. "Not me. You." The words hung in the air, light but heavy all at once. Eleanor's smile faltered. "Oh, honey," she began gently, "Grandma doesn't sing anymore." Lily's brow furrowed in that determined way only a 12-year-old could manage. "But you used to. Mom told me. She said you had the most beautiful voice in the whole town." Eleanor's heart ached at the innocence in her granddaughter's eyes. She reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from Lily's cheek. "That was a long time ago, darling. My singing days are behind me." But Lily wasn't ready to let it go. She placed the flyer on the table, her small hands pressing it flat. "Please think about it, Grandma. You always tell me it's never too late to try something new." Eleanor chuckled softly, though her chest tightened. "You're a smart one, aren't you?" That night, long after the house had grown quiet, Eleanor sat alone in her living room, the flyer resting on her lap. She traced the bold letters with her fingertips. Annual Town Talent Show, a celebration of dreams. Dreams. The word felt like a whisper from her past. She closed her eyes and let herself imagine it, just for a moment, standing under bright lights, microphone in hand, her voice trembling but alive, filling the room with music. The thought made her heart race, and her palms sweat. But then the doubts flooded in, just as quickly. Her voice was fragile, aged. What if she embarrassed herself? What if people remembered the girl she once was and pitied the woman she had become? She sighed deeply and turned off the lamp, the room sinking into shadow. But sleep didn't come easily that night. Her mind kept circling back to Lily's bright eyes, that unwavering belief shining through. And somewhere, deep in the quiet corners of her heart, a spark flickered to life, a spark she thought had died long ago. The next morning, Eleanor stood at the kitchen counter, the flyer still on the table. She picked up the phone with trembling fingers and dialed the number at the bottom of the page. "Hello," she said softly when someone answered. I'd like to sign up." Little did she know, that single phone call was about to open a door she never thought she'd walk through again. The days following her decision felt surreal. Eleanor kept the news mostly to herself, not ready to face questions or doubts from neighbors or even close friends. Only Margaret, her oldest friend from church, knew, and even she was sworn to secrecy. "I just want to see if I can do it," Eleanor whispered one afternoon over tea, her hand shaking slightly around the cup. "I'm not sure I'm brave enough." Margaret smiled gently, squeezing Eleanor's hand. "You're already braver than most. Just the fact that you said yes, that's huge." Eleanor decided to start small. Alone in her living room, She pulled out a battered hymnal that had been tucked away in her bookshelf for years. She flipped through the delicate pages, her fingers pausing over familiar titles. Amazing Grace, How Great Thou Art, His Eye is on the Sparrow. These were the songs of her childhood, songs that once flowed effortlessly from her lips. Now, just looking at the words made her heart ache. She chose Amazing Grace to begin. Her voice was thin and shaky at first, almost unrecognizable to her own ears. She stopped after the first verse, tears welling in her eyes. "What am I doing?" she whispered to the empty room. "This is foolish." But something inside her urged her to keep going. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and started again. Slowly, patiently, she worked through the song line by line, each note a tiny victory. The more she sang, the more her confidence began to bloom, not because her voice was perfect, but because she was doing something she never thought possible again. Margaret joined her for a few quiet rehearsals, sitting in a chair with eyes closed, listening intently. "It's not about hitting every note," Margaret said one afternoon, wiping a tear from her cheek. "It's about your heart. People will feel it, Eleanor. I promise you." As the talent show drew closer, Eleanor's nerves tightened like a knot. She lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, her mind filled with fears. What if her voice failed her on stage? What if people laughed or pitied her? Each doubt seemed louder than the last. And yet, every morning, she stood in front of her mirror, hands clasped tightly, practicing over and over. Her voice, though weathered and fragile, began to carry a quiet strength shaped by years of silent longing. Lily, always curious, caught her one afternoon in mid-rehearsal. The little girl's eyes widened with wonder. "Grandma, you sound beautiful." Eleanor knelt down, pulling Lily into a hug. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm trying my best." In those final days before the show, Eleanor felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. The thought of stepping onto a stage filled her with dread, but also with a deep sense of purpose she hadn't felt in decades. And as the sun set on the night before the performance, Eleanor stood alone by her window, gazing out at the quiet streets of her town, whispering to herself, "Tomorrow, I'll find my voice again." What she didn't realize was that tomorrow's stage would hold more than just a performance. It would hold a moment that no one in that audience would ever forget. The night of the talent show arrived faster than Eleanor expected. She stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the soft blue scarf around her neck, a gift from Lily, who had whispered, "It's your lucky color, Grandma." Her hands trembled slightly as she applied a touch of lipstick, staring at her reflection with wide, uncertain eyes. 80 years old, and here she was, about to step onto a stage for the very first time. Thomas, her late husband, had always encouraged her to dream big. She felt his absence keenly that night, but she also felt his spirit quietly cheering her on, just as he had during those long-ago evenings by the record player. When she arrived at the community center, the place was buzzing with excitement. The smell of popcorn and fresh coffee wafted through the air, and the sound of chatter and laughter echoed off the walls. Eleanor clutched her purse tightly, her heart pounding like a drum. Margaret met her at the door, wrapping her in a warm hug. "You ready?" she asked, her eyes shining. "Ready as I'll ever be," Eleanor replied, forcing a brave smile. They made their way backstage, where other performers, young and old, were tuning instruments, rehearsing lines, and pacing nervously. Eleanor found a quiet corner and sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The stage curtain rippled gently, and she could hear the muffled voice of the announcer welcoming everyone to the event. Her stomach churned with nerves. Lily ran up a few minutes later, breathless and beaming. "Grandma, you look so pretty. I'm going to sit right in the front row, okay?" Eleanor hugged her tightly. "Thank you, my darling. Just seeing your smile makes me braver." As the show began, Eleanor watched from the wings, her breath catching every time a performer stepped onto the stage. A young boy played the piano with remarkable skill. A teenage girl sang a pop song that had the audience clapping along. Time seemed to slow as her own moment crept closer and closer. Her name was called over the loudspeaker. "And now, please welcome Eleanor Davis." The blood drained from her face. Margaret squeezed her hand, whispering, "You've got this." Eleanor nodded, her legs shaky as she stood. She took a deep breath, each step toward the stage feeling heavier than the last. The bright lights hit her eyes as she stepped out from behind the curtain. The room seemed to spin for a brief second, the sea of faces, the expectant hush, the weight of every eye on her. She gripped the microphone stand with both hands, her heart thudding wildly. And then, silence. The kind of silence that holds its breath, waiting. Eleanor looked out into the crowd and spotted Lily, sitting in the front row, eyes wide with hope and pride. She closed her eyes for a moment, grounding herself, and whispered under her breath, "This is for you, for all of you." The music began softly, the first familiar notes of Amazing Grace floating through the room. And just as she opened her mouth to sing, something unexpected happened. For a brief moment, Eleanor thought her voice might fail her completely. The microphone felt cold and heavy in her hands, and her throat tightened with nerves. But then, something shifted. She glanced down at Lily, whose little face was beaming with pure pride, and suddenly, all the fear and doubt that had weighed her down for so long seemed to melt away. She took a deep breath and sang. The first note trembled, light and fragile, but it was there. A soft murmur swept through the audience as people leaned in, drawn to the quiet power of her voice. Eleanor's hands gripped the microphone tightly, her eyes fluttering closed as she moved into the familiar melody of Amazing Grace. Her voice wasn't perfect. It cracked here and there, worn thin by time and the scars of her past. But it was full of something else, something that no amount of technical perfection could replace. It was full of life, of longing, of decades of hope and heartbreak woven into every word. And the crowd felt it, every single note washing over them like a wave. The room grew utterly still. People who had been chatting or sipping coffee just moments before now sat frozen, eyes locked on the woman standing so bravely on stage. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the creak of a chair shifting slightly, but nothing else. Every heart in that room seemed to beat in time with Eleanor's song. As she reached the final verse, Eleanor's voice gained strength. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision, but she didn't stop. She sang with everything she had left in her, decades of silent dreams, quiet prayers, and hidden pain pouring out in a single, beautiful release. When the last note faded into the air, a hush fell over the room. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no one spoke. And then, the applause erupted. It started with Lily, clapping her little hands as hard as she could, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then Margaret, standing and applauding with pride. And soon the entire room was on its feet, a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very walls of the community center. Eleanor stood there, breathless, overwhelmed, tears spilling freely down her face. She looked out at the crowd, at all those shining eyes, all those faces lit up with admiration and emotion, and she realized something incredible. She had found her voice again. Not just her singing voice, but something deeper. Her courage, her strength, her belief in herself. As she stepped off the stage, Lily rushed into her arms, squeezing her tightly. "Grandma, that was amazing," she cried. Eleanor laughed through her tears, holding her granddaughter close. "Thank you, sweetheart. I never thought I'd feel this way again." What Eleanor didn't realize at that moment was that her song, so long delayed, so hard won, had touched not just her family, but every single person in that room. And her journey was far from over. In the days that followed the talent show, Eleanor's life changed in ways she never expected. What had started as a quiet, personal triumph quickly blossomed into something much bigger. Neighbors stopped by her house with flowers and handwritten notes, telling her how deeply moved they had been by her performance. People she barely knew came up to her at the grocery store, their eyes shining with emotion. "You made us all believe again," one woman whispered, clutching Eleanor's hand tightly. "Thank you." The local newspaper ran a story with the headline, "80-year-old song brings community to tears." There was even a photo of Eleanor on stage, eyes closed, singing her heart out under the warm stage lights. Lily proudly clipped the article and taped it to the refrigerator, showing it off to anyone who visited. But beyond the public recognition, something much deeper had shifted within Eleanor herself. For the first time in decades, she felt alive, whole. The weight she had carried for so long, the silent grief of a dream unfulfilled, had finally lifted. Her heart felt lighter, her steps a little quicker. She smiled more, laughed louder, and even caught herself humming around the house again. Margaret, always her biggest supporter, encouraged her to keep going. "People need to hear you, Eleanor. You've got something special to share." And so, tentatively at first, Eleanor accepted new invitations. She sang at her church's Sunday service, her voice trembling but full of heart. She performed at a senior center fundraiser, bringing tears to the eyes of fellow elders who saw their own unspoken dreams reflected in her courage. Each time she stepped up to the microphone, she felt her confidence grow, her spirit shining a little brighter. One afternoon, as she sat on her porch swing with Lily, Eleanor found herself reflecting aloud. "You know, sweetheart," she said softly, "I spent so many years thinking my time had passed. I thought some dreams just weren't meant to come true. But standing on that stage, I realized something important." Lily looked up at her, eyes wide. "What's that, Grandma?" Eleanor smiled, her gaze distant but full of warmth. "It's never too late. Not for dreams, not for hope, and not for finding your voice again, no matter how long it's been silent." That simple truth stayed with Eleanor every day after. And though she never sought fame or fortune, her story became a beacon of inspiration for others, proof that the human spirit is stronger than we realize, and that courage can be found at any age. As the sun set behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the quiet town, Eleanor closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. For the first time in a long time, her heart was at peace. And though her voice had been quieted once, it would never be silent again. Looking back now, Eleanor often marveled at how a single choice, just one moment of bravery, had changed everything. She had spent most of her life believing that her dream was gone forever, tucked away in the past like a song she would never sing again. But standing on that stage at 80 years old, her voice trembling but true, she realized something that would stay with her for the rest of her days. Dreams don't disappear. They wait. They wait for the right moment, for the right push, for the right spark of courage. Her life had grown richer in ways she'd never imagined. The friendships deepened, the conversations blossomed, and her own sense of self-worth soared. Eleanor found herself invited to share her story at community events, where other seniors, men and women with dreams long buried, looked at her with newfound hope. Some came up afterward, gripping her hands, tears in their eyes. "I thought it was too late for me," they'd say. "But now, maybe it's not." That, Eleanor realized, was the true gift. Not just finding her own voice again, but helping others believe in theirs. One evening, as she rocked gently on her porch swing, watching the last light of day slip below the horizon, Eleanor reflected on everything she had learned. The garden, the laughter of her grandchildren, the sweet hum of a song rising softly in her chest, it all felt different now. Brighter, fuller. And as the wind carried the distant sound of church bells, she smiled quietly to herself. "My voice may have faltered," she whispered, "but my spirit never did." And to anyone listening, whether near or far, her message was simple but powerful. It's never too late. Not to dream. Not to start again. Not to believe in something beautiful for yourself, no matter how many years have passed. If you've been holding on to a dream, whether it's to sing, to dance, to travel, to paint, or simply to try something new, I hope Eleanor's story reminds you that the door is never fully closed. You hold the key. And sometimes, all it takes is one small step, one act of courage to open it wide. So tell me, what dream is still waiting in your heart? What is that one thing you've always wanted to do, no matter how impossible it seemed? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Let's inspire each other. And if Eleanor's journey touched you today, even just a little, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Here, we believe that every dream, big or small, is worth chasing, no matter your age. Because it's never too late to dream.